She found out too late, slept with a stranger, and had quadruplets. The shocking truth. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. The neon lights of downtown Boston blurred through Claire Bennett's windshield as she drove aimlessly through the unfamiliar streets. Rain pelted against the glass, matching the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. 3 months had passed since she'd found David's goodbye note on their kitchen counter, yet the hollow ache in her chest remained as fresh as that morning. At 29, Claire hadn't expected to be starting over. The wedding invitations had already been sealed, their dream house in Connecticut nearly furnished. Now, those cream-colored envelopes gathered dust in a box she couldn't bring herself to throw away, and their perfect colonial home belonged to someone else. She pulled into the parking lot of the Crimson Room, an upscale bar she'd noticed while wandering through Beacon Hill earlier that day. The establishment's warm glow promised refuge from both the storm and her thoughts. Claire checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, running fingers through her honey-brown waves. The woman staring back at her looked tired but determined, a look she'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Just one drink," she whispered to herself, smoothing down her navy silk blouse. Then back to the hotel. The interior of the Crimson Room lived up to its name, with deep burgundy walls and crystal chandeliers casting intimate shadows across leather booths. Classical jazz played softly in the background, and the subtle scent of cedar and vanilla hung in the air. Claire made her way to the bar, settling onto a high-backed stool in a quiet corner. "De Manhattan, please," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt, "and make it a double." "Rough night." The bartender, an older gentleman with kind eyes, placed a napkin in front of her. Claire managed a small smile. "Rough few months, actually." As the bartender crafted her drink, Claire's attention drifted to the other patrons. Couples huddled in corners, business people unwinding after long days. And then her breath caught slightly. A man sitting alone at the far end of the bar. Even in profile, there was something magnetic about him. His dark suit spoke of wealth, but it was the way he held himself that drew her eye, straight-backed, yet somehow carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. As if sensing her gaze, he turned his head. Their eyes met across the dimly lit space, and Claire felt a jolt of electricity course through her. His features were striking, strong jaw, intense dark eyes, and slight creases around his mouth that hinted at hidden smiles. But it was the flash of recognition she saw in his expression that held her captive, not of her face, but of something deeper, as if he too knew what it meant to be running from ghosts. The bartender set Claire's Manhattan in front of her, breaking the spell. When she glanced back, the mysterious man had returned to contemplating his own drink, a glass of what appeared to be expensive scotch. Claire took a sip of her cocktail, letting the warmth of the bourbon chase away the evening's chill. First time in Boston. The voice was deep and smooth, much closer than she expected. The man had moved to occupy the seat next to her, though she hadn't noticed him approach. "Is it that obvious?" Claire asked, turning to face him fully. Up close, his presence was even more compelling. "You have that look of someone discovering a new city," he replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm Lucas." "Claire." She offered her name like a gift, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "And yes, I'm just passing through. Sometimes new places help clear the mind." Lucas nodded, understanding flickering in his dark eyes. Running to or running from? The question should have felt invasive, but instead, it struck a chord of truth that resonated through her. "Maybe a bit of both," Claire admitted. "You seem familiar with the concept, more than I'd like to be." He raised his glass slightly. "Adieu to new beginnings." Claire clinked her glass against his, studying the way the light played across his features. There was something guarded about him, carefully controlled, yet she could sense depths of emotion beneath the surface. "To new beginnings," she echoed. The hours melted away as they talked, their conversation flowing effortlessly from light observations about the city to deeper discussions about art, travel, and life's unexpected turns. Lucas spoke with quiet intelligence, but revealed little about himself beyond the present moment. It should have raised red flags, but Claire found herself drawn to his air of mystery, to the gentle way he listened, as if each word she spoke was precious. As the evening wore on, the space between them grew smaller, their knees brushing occasionally, sending sparks of awareness through Claire's body. When Lucas's hand found hers on the bar, his thumb tracing light circles on her skin, she didn't pull away. The touch felt both dangerous and inevitable, like standing on the edge of a cliff and knowing you're about to jump. "Would you like to get some air?" Lucas asked, his voice low and intimate. Claire knew what he was really asking. She thought of her careful plans, of the walls she'd built since David, of all the reasons she should say goodnight and walk away. Instead, she found herself nodding, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. As they stepped out into the now clear night, the cool air did nothing to dispel the heat building between them. Lucas's hand found the small of her back, gentle but sure, guiding her toward whatever lay ahead. Claire closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the moment. Sometimes the biggest changes in life come disguised as small decisions. Later, Claire would look back on this night and wonder if some part of her knew that with each step away from the Crimson Room, she was walking toward a future that would transform her life forever. The night air carried whispers of possibility as Claire and Lucas walked through the lamplit streets of Beacon Hill. Their footsteps echoed against centuries-old cobblestones, and the golden glow from townhouse windows created intimate pools of light around them. Claire felt as though she'd stepped into another world, one where practical decisions and careful planning held no power over the magnetic pull, drawing her toward this enigmatic stranger. "Tell me about your work," Claire said, trying to ground herself in normal conversation. Their shoulders brushed as they walked, each casual touch sending electricity through her body. Lucas hesitated, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Oh, I'm in business management," he answered, his voice carefully neutral. "Corporate restructuring, mainly. Nothing particularly exciting." He steered the conversation back to her. "You mentioned you're in public relations? Event planning and crisis management?" Claire nodded, noting how smoothly he'd deflected. "Though lately, I've been thinking about starting my own consulting firm." She left out how David's betrayal had derailed those plans, but something in Lucas's expression suggested he understood the weight of what remained unsaid. They paused at a scenic overlook. The city lights spread before them like scattered stars. Lucas stood close behind her, his presence both protective and thrilling. When he spoke, his breath warmed her ear. "Sometimes the best decisions are the ones we never planned to make." Claire turned to face him, their bodies mere inches apart. In the dim light, his dark eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "And what about you, Lucas? Are you someone who plans everything, or do you trust in chance?" His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, fingertips lingering against her cheek. "I used to think I could control everything in my life," he murmured. "But now I'm not so sure." The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable. Lucas's lips met hers with a gentleness that quickly gave way to hunger. Claire melted into him, her hands gripping the lapels of his expensive suit as his arms encircled her waist. The world narrowed to the sensations of his mouth on hers, the solid warmth of his body, the faint scent of his cologne mingled with something uniquely him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Claire saw her own desire reflected in Lucas's eyes. "My hotel is close," she whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. Lucas cupped her face in his hands, studying her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Are you sure?" In response, Claire kissed him again, pouring all her longing and need into the contact. Whatever consequences tomorrow might bring, tonight she wanted to feel alive again. The walk to her hotel passed in a blur of stolen kisses and building anticipation. In the elevator, Lucas pressed her against the mirrored wall, his kisses growing more urgent. Claire's fingers tangled in his dark hair, her body arching into his touch. Her room, when they finally reached it, was bathed in the soft glow of city lights filtering through the windows. Lucas took his time undressing her, his touches reverent and thorough, as if memorizing every inch of her skin. Claire matched his pace, unbuttoning his shirt to reveal a toned chest marked with a long, silvery scar that disappeared beneath his waistband. "War-wound?" she asked softly, tracing the mark with her fingertips. A shadow crossed his face. "Something like that." He captured her hand, bringing it to his lips. "No more questions tonight." Claire nodded, understanding. Tonight wasn't about the past or the future. It was about this moment, this connection that defied explanation. When Lucas laid her on the bed, his weight settling over her, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his skin against hers, the pressure of his lips trailing fire down her neck, the way their bodies moved together as if they'd known each other in another life. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Claire's head resting on Lucas's chest as he traced patterns on her bare shoulder. The city hummed quietly beyond the windows, a gentle reminder of the world they'd temporarily forgotten. "Tell me a secret," Claire murmured, feeling safe in the darkness. Lucas was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "Sometimes I wish I could be someone else entirely. Start fresh, without the weight of expectations and past mistakes." Claire propped herself up on an elbow, studying his face in the dim light. "We all have things we wish we could change. Your past seems a lot more straightforward than mine." His smile held a hint of bitterness. "Is that why you're in Boston, running from your past?" Lucas pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Let's not talk about the past or the future. Just stay here with me, in this moment." They made love again, slower this time, with a desperate edge that felt like goodbye. Claire tried to memorize everything. The strength of his hands, the taste of his skin, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both, and Claire drifted off in Lucas's arms, feeling more complete than she had in months. When she woke the next morning, sunlight streaming through the windows, the bed beside her was empty. On the nightstand lay a single red rose and a note written in elegant script. "Thank you for making me feel alive again. L." Claire held the note to her chest, fighting back unexpected tears. It had been just one night. She hadn't expected more. So why did his absence feel like losing a piece of herself? She didn't know then that the real implications of that night were only beginning to unfold, or that the mysterious Lucas Hayes would soon become an inescapable part of her future in ways she could never have imagined. 6 weeks after that fateful night in Boston, Claire sat at her desk in her Portland apartment, staring blankly at her computer screen. The morning sunlight streaming through her window did nothing to ease the persistent nausea that had been her constant companion for the past week. A half-eaten piece of dry toast sat abandoned beside her keyboard, the only food she'd managed to keep down today. "It's just stress," she muttered to herself, closing her eyes against another wave of dizziness. The launch event she was planning for next week's client was enough to make anyone feel overwhelmed. Yet something about this felt different. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from her sister. Claire took a deep breath before answering. "Hey, Lila." "You sound terrible." Lila's familiar voice came through, sharp with concern. "Still fighting that stomach bug?" "I'm fine," Claire insisted, even as she pushed away from her desk, fighting another surge of nausea. "Just busy with work." "Right." Lila's tone dripped with skepticism. "And that's why you've cancelled our last 2 lunch dates, and why you hung up on me mid-sentence yesterday to throw up." Claire sank onto her couch, pulling a throw blanket around her shoulders. The morning chill seemed to seep into her bones lately. "I've probably picked up a virus or something." "Or something," Lila agreed. There was a pause. Then, "Claire, when was your last period?" The question hit Claire like a physical blow. She'd been so busy with work, so determined not to think about that night in Boston, that she hadn't even noticed. "Oh, God," she whispered. "I'm coming over," Lila announced. "Don't move." 20 minutes later, Claire sat on the edge of her bathtub, staring at 3 pregnancy tests lined up on the counter. Lila paced the small space, her heels clicking against the tile floor. 3 minutes left, she announced, checking her watch. "This is ridiculous," Claire said, her voice shaking. "It was one night. We were careful." Lila stopped pacing to squeeze her sister's shoulder. "Sometimes careful isn't enough." Claire's mind raced back to that night. Lucas's gentle touches, his mysterious smile, the way he'd disappeared by morning. She'd tried to find him afterward, searching social media and business directories, but Lucas Hayes seemed to be a ghost. The hotel staff hadn't even remembered him. The timer on Lila's phone chimed, startling them both. Claire couldn't move, so Lila stepped forward to check the tests. Her sharp intake of breath told Claire everything she needed to know. "All positive," Lila confirmed softly. Claire's world tilted on its axis. Pregnant. She was pregnant by a man she'd known for one night, a man who'd vanished without a trace. The room began to spin. "Breathe," Lila commanded, kneeling in front of her. Just breathe, Claire." "What am I going to do?" Claire whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't even know his real name, Lila. What if everything he told me was a lie?" "First things first," Lila said, slipping into lawyer mode. "We need to confirm this with a doctor, then we can figure out our next steps." 2 days later, Claire sat in her OB/GYN's office, trying to process what she was hearing. Dr. Andrea Wilson, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, pointed to the ultrasound screen. "Based on these measurements, you're about 6 weeks along," Dr. Wilson explained. Then she paused, adjusting the wand slightly. "Oh," Claire's heart stopped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Dr. Wilson assured her quickly, "but I'm detecting multiple heartbeats." The world seemed to freeze. "Multiple? What do you mean, multiple?" "Doctor." Wilson turned the screen so Claire could see better. "Here, here, here, and here." She pointed to 4 distinct flickering points. "Congratulations, Ms. Bennett, you're carrying quadruplets." Claire heard a ringing in her ears. Quadruplets, 4 babies. The room started to spin again. "I know this is overwhelming." Dr. Wilson's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Multiple pregnancies, especially quadruplets, are considered high risk. We'll need to monitor you very carefully." Claire nodded mechanically as the doctor outlined next steps: specialists to consult, precautions to take, lifestyle changes to implement immediately. Her hand drifted to her still flat stomach. 4 tiny lives, created from one night of passion with a mysterious stranger. Later that evening, Claire sat on her balcony, watching the sun set over Portland's skyline. Her phone lay on the table beside her, open to a search page for Lucas Hayes. She'd tried every variation she could think of: business directories, social media, news articles. Nothing seemed to fit the man she'd met. A gentle flutter in her stomach made her pause. It was too early to feel the baby's move, just anxiety or imagination, yet somehow that phantom sensation centered her. These children, however unexpected, were real. They were hers. We'll figure this out," she whispered, both to herself and to the tiny lives growing inside her. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." As darkness fell over the city, Claire made a decision. She would find Lucas, not because she needed him, but because these children deserved to know their father, and because the connection they'd shared that night had been too real to be built entirely on lies. What she didn't know, as she finally headed inside to sleep, was that across the country, Lucas Hayes sat in his penthouse office, staring at his own computer screen. On it was a report from his private investigator, detailing Claire Bennett's recent medical appointments. His hands shook as he read the ultrasound results, the weight of what he'd set in motion crashing down around him. 4 babies, his children, and a woman he couldn't allow himself to love, no matter how much his heart ached to return to her. Claire stared at the resignation letter on her laptop screen, her hands hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. At 12 weeks pregnant with quadruplets, her body was already showing signs of the extraordinary journey ahead. Dr. Wilson had been clear. Continuing her demanding job at Reynolds and Associates while carrying 4 babies would be impossible. You don't have to quit entirely. Lila's voice crackled through the speakerphone. What about freelance consulting, working from home? Maybe. Claire absently rubbed her slightly swollen belly. I just hate feeling like I'm giving up everything I've worked for. You're not giving up, you're adapting, Lila corrected. Besides, I think I found something interesting about your mystery man. Claire's heart skipped. What do you mean? Remember that fancy watch he was wearing? The one you mentioned. I showed the description to my friend at Morgan Stanley. She says it sounds like a limited edition Patek Philippe. They only made 50 of them, and they were exclusively sold to members of some private investment group. How much? Claire asked, already dreading the answer. Around $2 million. Lila paused. In Claire, whoever Lucas Hayes really is, he's not just wealthy. He's in a completely different stratosphere. The revelation settled like a weight in Claire's stomach. She thought back to that night, his expensive suit, his careful deflections about his work, the way he'd moved through the world with such practiced ease. How had she been so blind? There's more, Lila continued. I did some digging into private investment groups in New England. There's a name that keeps coming up, Hayes International. The CEO is Charles Hayes, and rumor has it he has a reclusive son who's next in line to take over the company. Claire's hands trembled as she opened a new browser tab. Hayes International's website loaded, revealing a sleek corporate facade. There, in the leadership section, was a photo of Charles Hayes, a stern-faced man in his 60s with familiar dark eyes. "Send me everything you found," Claire said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Later that afternoon, Claire sat in Dr. Wilson's waiting room, surrounded by other expectant mothers. Most were accompanied by partners or family members. Claire tried not to feel the emptiness of the chair beside her. "Miss Bennett," a nurse appeared with a concerned expression. "Could you come with me for a moment? There's something unusual in your file we need to discuss." Claire followed the nurse to a small office where an older woman in a lab coat waited. The name tag on her desk read, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, Chief of Obstetrics. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Dr. Martinez. Please sit down." The doctor's expression was carefully neutral. "We received some unusual paperwork regarding your pregnancy. Are you aware that someone has arranged for comprehensive private medical coverage for you and the babies?" Claire's breath caught. "What?" Dr. Martinez slid a document across the desk. The policy was set up through a private medical group that typically serves high-net-worth individuals. It covers all prenatal care, delivery, and postnatal care for you and the quadruplets. The interesting part is that it was established the day after your first appointment here. Claire's hands shook as she examined the paperwork. The policy was indeed comprehensive, more than comprehensive. It was extraordinary. Every possible medical need had been anticipated and covered. The policy was arranged by Hayes Medical Trust. Dr. Martinez continued carefully. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Claire closed her eyes, fighting back tears. Lucas knew. He'd known about the babies almost from the beginning, had been watching over her from afar. The realization brought a confusing mix of comfort and anger. "Yes," she finally answered. "I believe it does." That evening, Claire sat in her new apartment, a spacious 3-bedroom she'd found closer to the hospital. The move had depleted most of her savings, but she couldn't raise 4 babies in her old studio. The setting sun cast long shadows across boxes she hadn't yet unpacked. Her laptop displayed an article about Hayes International's troubled history. The company had been embroiled in scandal 5 years ago when several board members were accused of insider trading. Charles Hayes had emerged unscathed, but his son, whose name was conspicuously absent from all reports, had disappeared from public view around the same time. A sharp knock at the door startled her. Claire wasn't expecting anyone, and Lila was in court all day. She approached cautiously, checking the peephole. A well-dressed woman in her 40s stood in the hallway, holding a leather briefcase. Something about her bearing screamed, "Corporate executive." "Miss Bennett, the woman called through the door. "My name is Victoria Blackwood. I represent Hayes International, and I need to speak with you about Lucas Hayes." Claire's heart pounded. Through the peephole, she could see Victoria pulling out a business card. "I understand your reluctance," Victoria continued, her voice softening, "but there are things you need to know about Lucas, about the danger you might be in, and about why he had to stay away." Claire's hand hovered over the doorknob. Every instinct told her opening that door would change everything. But as one of the babies fluttered inside her, she could feel them now, tiny butterfly wings of movement. She knew she had no choice. She had to know the truth, not just for herself, but for the 4 little lives depending on her. With a deep breath, Claire opened the door, stepping into whatever storm awaited on the other side. Victoria Blackwood sat perfectly poised on Claire's couch, her elegant appearance a stark contrast to the half-unpacked moving boxes surrounding them. She held a manila envelope in her lap, her manicured fingers tapping it rhythmically as she studied Claire. "How long have you worked for Lucas?" Claire asked, breaking the tense silence. A slight smile crossed Victoria's face. 15 years. I was there when he first joined Hayes International, fresh out of Harvard Business School. Back then, he still believed he could change things from the inside." Claire settled into an armchair, one hand protectively cradling her growing belly. "Change what? The corruption?" Victoria's expression hardened. "Hayes International isn't just a company, Ms. Bennett. It's a dynasty built on secrets and selective blindness. Charles Hayes, Lucas's father, has spent decades building a network of influence that extends far beyond legitimate business interests." She opened the envelope, removing a series of photographs. The first showed a younger Lucas standing beside his father at what appeared to be a charity gala. The resemblance between them was striking, but where Charles's expression held calculated charm, Lucas's eyes carried a warmth that Claire recognized. 5 years ago," Victoria continued, "Lucas discovered evidence of extensive money laundering through the company's international subsidiaries. Not just tax evasion. We're talking about funds connected to arms dealing, drug cartels, political corruption across 3 continents. Claire's throat went dry. The insider trading scandal, a cover story. The real situation was far worse. Lucas gathered evidence, planning to take it to the FBI, but Charles found out. Victoria's voice turned bitter. The next day, Lucas's younger brother Ryan was nearly killed in a random mugging. The message was clear. "Oh, God," Claire whispered, remembering the scar she'd traced on Lucas's chest that night. "The scar?" Victoria nodded grimly. Lucas tried to protect Ryan during the attack. After that, he realized he couldn't fight Charles directly, not without putting everyone he cared about at risk. So he appeared to surrender, stepped back from public view, but he's been quietly working to dismantle his father's network ever since. She pulled out another document, a newspaper clipping about the mysterious closure of several Hayes International subsidiaries over the past few years. Each of these represented a piece of Charles's illegal empire. Lucas has been systematically destroying his father's power base, but he has to move carefully. One wrong step and people die. Claire stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The setting sun painted Portland's skyline in shades of gold and crimson, but she barely noticed. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you're carrying Hayes' heirs." Victoria's words fell like stones in still water, 4 of them. "The moment Charles finds out, you'll become either a threat or an asset in his eyes. There is no middle ground." "He doesn't know." Claire turned back, surprised. "Not yet. Lucas has kept your pregnancy off Charles's radar by routing everything through shell companies and trusted allies like myself. But he won't be able to hide it forever." Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. "Which brings me to why I'm really here." She retrieved a small device from her briefcase. It looked like a sleek mobile phone. "This is a secure communication line connected to a private network. Use it to contact me or Lucas in an emergency. Memorize the numbers, then delete them. Trust no one else." Claire took the device, its weight feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. "Lucas, is he—" "He wants to protect you," Victoria said softly, "even if that means staying away. But there's something else you should know." She hesitated. "Charles has been pressing Lucas to marry Regina Winters, the daughter of his oldest ally. The merger of their families would consolidate Charles's power base. The wedding announcement is expected any day now." The room seemed to spin. Claire sank back into her chair, Victoria's words echoing in her head. A marriage arrangement. Of course, in Lucas's world, even love would be a business transaction. "I know it's a lot to process," Victoria said, gathering her things. "But time isn't on our side. Charles has eyes everywhere, and secrets have a way of emerging at the worst possible moment." She paused at the door, turning back to Claire. "Lucas was different after he met you. Happier, more determined. When he learned about the babies—" She smiled slightly. "Let's just say I've never seen him so terrified and hopeful at the same time." After Victoria left, Claire sat in the growing darkness, her mind racing. The secure phone sat on her coffee table like a ticking bomb. Outside, a car alarm blared briefly, making her jump. Was she being watched already? How quickly could Charles Hayes's influence reach Portland? Her hand drifted to her belly, feeling the now familiar flutter of movement. 4 tiny lives, already at the center of a dangerous game they knew nothing about. Claire picked up the secure phone, her finger hovering over the keypad. She could call Lucas right now, hear his voice, demand explanations. But Victoria's warnings echoed in her mind. One wrong step, and people die. Instead, she opened her laptop, pulling up everything she could find about Regina Winters and her family's connection to Hayes International. If she was going to protect her babies, she needed to understand the world they'd been born into. Hours later, as midnight approached, Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "Turn on the news, now." With trembling fingers, Claire pulled up a national news website. There, in bold headlines, was the announcement Victoria had warned about. Hayes International heir to Winters heiress in Society Merger of the Year. Below the headline was a photo of Lucas, her Lucas, standing beside a striking blonde woman at a charity event. His smile didn't reach his eyes, but few would notice that detail. Fewer still would understand what that forced smile cost him. Claire closed the laptop, tears sliding down her cheeks. In the darkness of her new apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and unspoken fears, she made a decision. She would not be a pawn in Charles Hayes's game. She would not let her children become bargaining chips in a corrupt empire. She would protect them, even if that meant protecting them from their own legacy. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, Lucas stood in his New York penthouse, staring at an identical news headline. In his hand, he clutched a small ultrasound photo Victoria had brought him, the first glimpse of his 4 unborn children. And in his heart, a plan was forming, one that would either save everyone he loved or destroy everything he'd spent 5 years working toward. At 16 weeks pregnant, Claire found herself studying her reflection in the floor-length mirror of her new bedroom. Her bump, already pronounced with 4 growing babies, was impossible to hide. She smoothed her blouse over the curve, remembering the latest ultrasound where she'd learned she was carrying 3 girls and a boy. "You're all going to be fighters," she whispered to her unborn children. "One just like your mama." The society pages had been buzzing for 2 weeks about Lucas's engagement to Regina Winters. Each new article felt like a fresh wound, but Claire refused to let it break her. Instead, she channeled her energy into preparation. The nursery was coming together, 4 elegant cribs arranged in a horseshoe pattern, soft yellow walls that caught the morning light. Her phone, her regular one, not the secure device from Victoria, chimed with a message from Lila. "Coffee, the usual place." Claire smiled. Her sister had been her rock through all of this, especially since she'd shared Victoria's revelations. 20 minutes later, she walked into their favorite cafe, spotting Lila at their regular corner table. "You're glowing," Lila said. as Claire sat down, then pushed forward a cup. "Chamomile tea for you." "How are my nieces and nephew?" "Active. Dr. Wilson says they're all healthy and right on track." Claire took a sip of tea. "But something's wrong. I can see it in your face." Lila hesitated, then pulled out her tablet. "A client at the firm mentioned something interesting. Look at this." She pulled up a business news site. The headline read, "Winters Pharmaceuticals under investigation for clinical trial irregularities. Regina's family company." Claire breathed. "It gets worse." Lila scrolled down. "The investigation centers on falsified data in cancer drug trials. If these allegations are true, they knowingly gave fake medicine to terminal patients." Claire felt sick, and not from morning sickness. The timing. Exactly. The engagement was announced just days before this story broke. Lila leaned forward. "Claire, what if this marriage isn't just about consolidating power? What if Lucas is using it to get closer to the Winters family's secrets?" Before Claire could respond, her secure phone vibrated in her purse. She pulled it out, seeing a message from Victoria. "Turn on the news. Now." Both sisters reached for their phones. Breaking news alerts flooded their screens. Breaking. Winters Pharmaceuticals, CEO found dead in apparent suicide. "Oh my God," Claire whispered. "Regina's father," Lila confirmed, scanning the article. "I found in his office this morning. Left a note allegedly confessing to years of corporate fraud." Claire's secure phone buzzed again. This time it was a voice call. Her heart pounding, she answered, "Get out of there. Now." Victoria's voice was tense. "Charles knows." "What? How?" "Someone talked. He knows about the babies, and he knows you're at the Morning Brew on Carlton Street. A team is already on their way. Get out the back door. There's a black SUV waiting. The driver will say, 'Midnight in Boston. Go now.'" Claire's hands shook as she ended the call. "We have to leave right now." Lila, bless her, didn't hesitate. They headed for the back door, Claire's heart racing. Just as they reached it, they heard commotion from the front of the cafe. Through the window, Claire glimpsed two men in suits entering, their eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency. The sight sent a chill down her spine. They slipped out the back door into the alley. A black SUV idled nearby, its engine running. A woman with short grey hair rolled down the window. "Midnight in Boston," she said quietly. Claire and Lila climbed in. As they pulled away, Claire saw the men emerge from the cafe, speaking urgently into their phones. "I'm Rachel," the driver said, smoothly navigating through back streets. "Victoria sent me. We're taking you somewhere safe." "My apartment," Claire started, but Rachel shook her head. "Already compromised. Victoria's team is clearing it out as we speak. Everything important will be moved to the safe house." The reality of her situation hit Claire like a physical blow. She was running from the grandfather of her unborn children, leaving behind the life she'd carefully built. "The Winters scandal," she said suddenly. Was that Lucas?" Rachel's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. "He's been working on exposing both families' corruption for months. The engagement was his cover to get closer to Regina's father, but something went wrong. The suicide wasn't part of the plan." "You think it wasn't suicide?" Lila asked sharply. "In this world, nothing is what it seems." Rachel turned onto a highway heading north. "Charles Hayes doesn't like loose ends, and now he's desperate. With the Winters empire crumbling, he needs those babies, his grandchildren, to secure his legacy." Claire's hands curled protectively around her belly. "He can't have them." "No, he can't," Rachel agreed. "Which is why Lucas is accelerating his plans. Victoria will fill you in when we reach the safe house, but things are going to happen very quickly now." They drove for hours, eventually turning onto a private road that wound through dense Maine forest. The safe house turned out to be a modernized farmhouse, isolated but well-equipped. Security cameras dotted the perimeter, and Claire glimpsed armed guards patrolling discreetly among the trees. Inside, Victoria waited with a team of people bent over laptops. She looked up as they entered, her usual polished appearance slightly disheveled. "Charles moved faster than we expected," she said without preamble. He's already filed for emergency custody rights for the unborn children, claiming you're an unfit mother, putting them at risk. He can't do that, Lila protested. They're not even born yet. He can try. Victoria's expression was grim. He has judges in his pocket, and his lawyers are already spinning a story about an unstable woman obsessed with his son. Where's Lucas? Claire demanded. Does he know what his father is doing? Victoria's phone chimed. She read the message, her face paling slightly. He knows. He's just been arrested for his brother Ryan's attempted murder 5 years ago. Charles is playing his end game. Claire sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Everything was unraveling. Lucas was in custody. She was in hiding. And somewhere in New York, Charles Hayes was moving pieces on a board she was only beginning to understand. One of the babies kicked sharply, as if sensing her distress. Claire straightened, drawing strength from the life within her. She'd been right earlier. They were all going to be fighters. What do we do now? She asked Victoria. Now? Victoria's lips curved in a slight smile. Now we show Charles Hayes why he should never have threatened a mother protecting her children. Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered over the safe house. Somewhere in a New York holding cell, Lucas Hayes smiled at his father's predictable moves, knowing that while Charles focused on him, Victoria and Claire were putting the real plan into motion. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Lucas Hayes sat in the interrogation room of the New York Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, his expensive suit jacket draped carefully over the back of his chair. Through the one-way mirror, he could sense his father's presence, watching, waiting for him to break. "Let's go over this again," Detective Russell said, shuffling through his papers. "Where were you on the night of April 15th, 5 years ago?" Lucas's lips curved in a slight smile. "As I've said, I was with my brother Ryan at the Metropolitan Club. We left around 11. On our way to the parking garage, we were attacked by 2 men. I got this trying to protect him." He traced the scar on his chest through his shirt. "And you never saw their faces. They wore masks." Lucas leaned forward. "Detective, we both know these charges are fabricated. The question is, how much did my father pay to have them filed?" The detective's expression flickered. Before he could respond, the door opened and a woman in a sharp suit entered. "This interview is over," she announced. "I'm Diana Chen, Mr. Hayes' attorney, and I have evidence that proves my client's innocence." Meanwhile, in the main safe house, Claire sat surrounded by papers and laptops, her legal team, assembled by Lila and Victoria, working furiously to counter Charles's custody maneuvers. "His legal argument is weak," Lila explained, highlighting sections of the emergency petition. "He's claiming you're unstable based on your sudden disappearance and erratic behavior, but we have documentation of the threats against you." "What about these?" Claire pointed to medical records she didn't recognize. Victoria leaned in. "Falsified records suggesting you have a history of mental health issues. Charles's work, obviously. But it's sloppy. He rushed it." "We can prove they're fake," Rachel added from her security station by the window. "The dates don't match your documented whereabouts. You were in London at a PR conference when these records claim you were in a Boston psychiatric facility." Claire rubbed her growing belly, feeling the baby's stir. At 18 weeks, their movements were becoming more distinct. The boy, she'd taken to calling him Leo in her mind, was particularly active today. "What about Lucas?" she asked. "Oh, those charges are about to backfire spectacularly," Victoria said, checking her phone. "Diana Chen has been waiting 5 years to spring this trap." Back in New York, Diana Chen laid out a series of photographs on the interrogation room table. They showed the random attackers meeting with Charles Hayes days before the assault on Ryan. "My client suspected his father's involvement and hired me to gather evidence," Diana explained to the stunned detective. "We've been building this case for years. Those men weren't muggers. They were hired muscle, paid to send a message." "Why come forward now?" Detective Russell asked. Lucas's expression hardened. Because my father just tried to claim custody of my unborn children by painting their mother as mentally unstable. He's playing the same game he always has, using family as leverage. I won't let him hurt them like he hurt Ryan. The detective studied the evidence, then looked at Lucas with new understanding. You know this could bring down Hayes International. That's the point. In Maine, Claire's secure phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. Turn on the news. The team gathered around a laptop as breaking news flooded the screen. Hayes International CEO Charles Hayes implicated in 2019. Attack on son. Financial crimes investigation launched. It's starting, Victoria said softly. Lucas just lit the fuse. Claire watched the coverage, her heart racing. Photos of Charles Hayes being escorted from his office by FBI agents filled the screen. The empire he'd built on secrets and fear was beginning to crumble. Charles's custody petition will be thrown out, Lila assured her. No judge will grant him rights after this. He's not finished, Rachel warned from the window. A man like Charles Hayes doesn't go down without taking others with him. As if to prove her point, Claire's secure phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. With Victoria nodding encouragement, she answered, "Hello, Claire." Regina Winter's voice was cool and precise. "I believe it's time we met. After all, we're both pawns in the Hayes men's game, aren't we?" Claire's grip tightened on the phone. "And I'm not a pawn in anyone's game." "No," Regina laughed softly. "Then why are you hiding in Maine while Lucas uses our engagement to destroy my family? My father is dead because of his schemes." "Your father was giving fake medicine to cancer patients," Claire shot back. "And your children's grandfather is a criminal who ordered his own son's attack. We all have family secrets, Claire. The question is, what are we prepared to do about them?" Victoria was already tracing the call, but Claire didn't need to stall. She had something to say. "The difference between us, Regina, is that I'm not fighting to protect secrets or power. I'm fighting to give my children a chance at a life free from all of this. If you're calling to threaten me, you should know I've stopped being afraid." There was a long pause. "Interesting," Regina finally said. "And perhaps we have more in common than I thought. Check your email in an hour. You might find the attached files enlightening." The line went dead. Claire looked at Victoria, who was already pulling up secured servers. "Regina Winters just offered to flip on Charles," Victoria said, her eyes wide, "with her testimony." "We can end this," Claire finished. As thunder rolled outside the safe house, Claire felt a strange sense of peace. The babies moved within her, strong and steady. Somewhere in New York, Lucas was finally fighting his battle in the open. And here in Maine, she was gathering an army of unlikely allies. Charles Hayes had spent decades building walls of fear and secrets, but he'd never faced the power of a mother protecting her children, or a son finally ready to step out of the shadows. The storm was breaking, and with it, the foundations of an empire built on lies. At 22 weeks pregnant, Claire waddled more than walked through the secure Maine compound. Her body felt impossibly full with 4 active babies, each one seeming to move in a different direction. Dr. Wilson had flown in secretly for her checkup, confirming that despite the stress, all 4 babies were developing perfectly. The email from Regina Winters had arrived exactly as promised, and its contents had shocked everyone. Now, a week later, Claire sat in the farmhouse's study, reviewing the documents for the 100th time while her security team patrolled outside. "It's all here," Lila said, organizing the evidence into categories. Decades of correspondence between Charles Hayes and Robert Winters. Money laundering, medical trial fraud, political bribes. They documented everything. "Men like that always keep records," Victoria commented, entering with fresh tea for Claire. "And insurance against each other. Regina's father knew Charles would sacrifice him if necessary. And that's exactly what happened," Claire murmured, rubbing her belly as one of the girls, she'd named them Grace, Hope, and Faith in her mind, kicked energetically. The door opened and Rachel stepped in. "She's here." Claire straightened in her chair as Regina Winters entered the study. In person, she was even more striking than in photos. Tall, elegant, and carrying herself with practiced poise, but there was something haunted in her eyes that the society pages had never captured. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Claire said. Regina moved to the window, gazing out at the pine trees swaying in the autumn wind. "My father wasn't a good man," she said quietly, "but he was my father. Charles Hayes used our family for years, then discarded us the moment we became a liability." She turned to face Claire. "I knew about Lucas's plan to expose the pharmaceutical fraud. I helped him gather evidence. What I didn't know was that Charles would—" She paused, composing herself. "The night my father died, he called me. He was terrified, said Charles had sent someone to handle the situation." "You think Charles had him killed?" Lila asked sharply. "I know he did, and I can prove it." Regina pulled out a small recorder. "My father was paranoid. He recorded everything, including his last conversation with Charles Hayes." The room fell silent as Regina pressed play. Charles's distinctive voice filled the air, cold and calculating as he calmly informed Robert Winters that loose ends needed to be tied up. 15 minutes later, "My father was dead," Regina said, stopping the recording. The suicide note was forged. I had it analyzed." Victoria was already making calls, her fingers flying over her phone's keyboard. "This changes everything. With this evidence, Charles Hayes goes to prison for murder," Lila finished. "The FBI will—" A commotion outside interrupted her. Rachel rushed to the window. "We have incoming, multiple vehicles." Claire's heart raced as security teams mobilized around the property. Through the window, she could see black SUVs approaching through the trees. "It's not Charles's men," Victoria said, checking her phone. "It's—" The study door burst open. Lucas Hayes stood in the doorway, his usual polished appearance slightly disheveled, his dark eyes immediately finding Claire. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Claire felt the babies move inside her, as if responding to their father's presence. Lucas stared at her swollen belly, naked emotion crossing his face. "You shouldn't be here," Victoria said sharply. "If Charles's people track you—" "Charles is in FBI custody," Lucas interrupted, still looking at Claire. "They arrested him an hour ago for Robert Winters's murder, but we have a bigger problem." He finally turned to address the room. "The board of Hayes International is holding an emergency meeting. They're going to liquidate the company's assets and disappear with billions in shareholders' money, including the pension funds of thousands of employees." "When?" Victoria demanded. "Tonight. They're meeting at 9. Lucas ran a hand through his hair. "I have proof of their plans, but I need to present it in person as the legitimate heir." "It's a trap," Regina interrupted. "Charles might be in custody, but his allies on the board are just as dangerous. They'll never let you leave that meeting alive." "I don't have a choice. Those pensions represent people's life savings." Claire stood, one hand supporting her belly. "Then we go together." "No." Lucas moved toward her, stopping just short of touching her. "I won't risk you or the babies." "You don't have a choice either," Claire said firmly. "Your father tried to destroy both our families by keeping us apart. I won't let his board of cronies separate us now." Lucas's expression softened as he looked at her. "Claire." "She's right," Victoria interjected. "We have a better chance if we coordinate. Regina's evidence, plus your board documents, plus Claire's presence as the mother of the Hayes heirs. It's a corporate coup they won't expect." "The press is already outside Hayes Tower," Regina added, checking her phone. "If we time this right—" Lucas turned to Claire, finally allowing himself to really look at her. His hand reached out, hovering over her belly. Claire took it gently and pressed it against where the babies were moving. His eyes widened as he felt his children kick. "4 of them," he whispered. "I still can't believe." 3 girls and a boy," Claire said softly. "They're fighters, like their father." Lucas's other hand came up to cup her cheek. "And like their mother," he corrected. Then, to everyone's surprise, he dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against Claire's belly. "I'm so sorry I stayed away. I thought I was protecting you." Claire ran her fingers through his hair. "I know, but we protect them better together." The moment was interrupted by Rachel's urgent voice. "If we're doing this, we need to move now. Weather Service is reporting heavy snow moving in, and we have a 3-hour drive to New York." Lucas stood, his hand finding Claire's. "Are you sure about this?" Claire thought about the past few months, the fear, the hiding, the strength she'd discovered in herself. She looked around the room at their unlikely alliance. Victoria with her unwavering loyalty, Regina with her need for justice, Lila with her fierce protectiveness, and Lucas, finally ready to stand in the light. "Your father thought he could use these babies to control us," she said. "Instead, they've given us the power to end his reign for good. Yes, I'm sure." As they moved into action, preparing for the confrontation ahead, storm clouds gathered over Maine. But for the first time since that night in Boston, Claire felt no fear. She had found her army, her strength, and her love. The real battle was just beginning. Snow fell in thick curtains as the convoy made its way south toward New York City. Claire sat in the back of an armored SUV, her head resting against Lucas's shoulder as he reviewed documents on his tablet. The babies were unusually active, as if sensing the tension in the air. "They're going to try to strip the company's assets through a series of shell corporations," Lucas explained, showing Claire a complex diagram of financial transfers. "Each board member has their own escape route planned. Once the money's gone, they'll scatter, like rats from a sinking ship," Regina commented from the front seat. She'd insisted on riding with them. Her father's recording clutched in her hand like a weapon. Victoria's voice crackled through the secure radio. "FBI teams are in position around Hayes Tower. They'll move on our signal, but we need concrete proof of the board's intentions, which means we have to let them start the transfer," Lucas said grimly. "If we move too soon, they'll claim it was a legitimate restructuring." Claire shifted uncomfortably, her back aching from the long ride. Lucas immediately noticed, his hand moving to support her lower back. "We should have let you stay in Maine," he murmured. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Claire covered his hand with hers. "Though your children seem to be practicing synchronized swimming." Lucas's eyes softened as he felt the movement under his palm. "They're strong, like you." He hesitated, then added, "I've thought about them every day since Victoria told me. About you. I wanted so badly to come to you." "I know." Claire turned to face him. But now you need to listen to me. Whatever happens tonight, whatever your father's people try to do, remember this: you're not him. You never were. These babies aren't his legacy. They're the start of something new, something better." Emotion flickered across Lucas's face as he leaned in to kiss her softly. Regina cleared her throat. "Hate to interrupt, but we've got company." Through the swirling snow, they could see flashing lights approaching from a side road. "A police escort," Rachel confirmed from the driver's seat. "Lila's federal judge came through with the warrants. They'll clear our path to Hayes Tower." The New York skyline emerged from the storm, Hayes Tower rising like a dark monolith against the grey sky. News vans clustered around the base, despite the weather, their satellite dishes collecting snow. Victoria's leak about the emergency board meeting worked, Regina observed. "Every major network is here." They pulled into a secure underground entrance, away from the media's eyes. As they stepped out of the vehicles, Claire was struck by the unreality of the moment. Her silk maternity dress and Lucas's tailored suit seemed absurdly formal in the concrete parking garage. "The board's already gathering in the penthouse conference room," Victoria reported, joining them with a team of lawyers. 17 members present, 4 calling in remotely. They're expecting Lucas to make a last-ditch attempt to stop the liquidation. What they're not expecting, Lila added, emerging from another vehicle, is a federal injunction freezing all Hayes International assets, effective the moment they attempt any unauthorized transfers. Lucas squeezed Claire's hand. "Ready?" She nodded, then gasped slightly as all 4 babies seemed to move at once. Lucas's concern was immediate, but Claire managed to smile. They're ready too." The elevator ride to the penthouse was tense. Claire studied their reflection in the polished doors. Lucas tall and determined. Regina coiled like a spring. Victoria checking her phone one last time. Lila reviewing the injunction papers. And herself, standing in the center. Her pregnancy both a vulnerability and a source of power. "Remember," Victoria said as they approached the top floor, "we need them to explicitly confirm their intentions. The FBI teams won't move until we have clear evidence." The conference room doors opened to reveal a long table surrounded by men and women in expensive suits. Their expressions ranged from shock to carefully controlled anger at the sight of the group entering. William Bradford, Charles's oldest friend and the board's interim chairman, stood at the head of the table. "Lucas, this is a closed meeting." "Actually," Lucas stepped forward, "as the majority shareholder following my father's arrest, I have every right to be here, and I've brought some interested parties who deserve to know how you plan to steal their future." Bradford's face reddened. "Security won't be coming," Regina said smoothly, placing a recorder on the table. "They're rather busy dealing with federal agents at the moment." "What is this?" a woman further down the table demanded. "This," Claire spoke up, her voice clear and strong, "is the end of business as usual at Hayes International." Her hand rested protectively on her belly as she continued, "You all thought Charles's grandchildren would be your insurance policy, a way to maintain control of the company while you looted its accounts. Instead, they're going to be your downfall." Bradford laughed, but there was an edge of desperation in it. "You think anyone will believe the claims of Charles Hayes's discarded son and his pregnant mistress?" "They'll believe this." Regina stepped forward, pressing play on the recorder. The room fell silent as Charles Hayes's voice filled the air, calmly ordering the death of Robert Winters. Before anyone could react, Bradford lunged for his laptop. "Transfer the funds! Now!" It was exactly what they needed. FBI agents burst through the doors as board members rushed to their computers, trying desperately to move the money before their accounts froze. In the chaos that followed, Claire felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. She grabbed Lucas's arm, her face paling. "Something's wrong!" Lucas looked at her in alarm, all thoughts of the arrest happening around them forgotten. "The babies. I think..." Claire's words were cut off by another wave of pain. "I think I'm having contractions." No, no. Lucas gathered her in his arms. "It's too early. Victoria." As Bradford was led away in handcuffs, still shouting orders, Victoria was already on the phone calling for medical transport. The babies moved frantically inside Claire, and she knew with terrible certainty that the stress had triggered early labor. The storm outside intensified, snow and wind battering the windows of Hayes Tower as Claire fought to protect the 4 tiny lives within her. The battle for Hayes International was ending, but an even more crucial fight was just beginning. Snow whirled around the emergency helicopter as it lifted off from Hayes Tower's rooftop helipad. Inside, Claire gripped Lucas's hand through another contraction while a flight medic monitored her vital signs. At 22 weeks, the babies were far too young to survive birth. Every minute they could delay labor was crucial. BPs elevated, the medic reported into his headset, contractions 4 minutes apart, patients receiving tocolytics to stop the labor. Lucas hadn't let go of Claire's hand since they'd evacuated the conference room. His face was ashen as he watched the medical team work. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Stay with us." Through the pain, Claire focused on the babies, movements, still strong and active. "Talk to them," she gasped between contractions. "They know your voice. From Boston." Understanding flickered in Lucas's eyes. He leaned close to her belly, speaking softly enough that only Claire could hear. "Hey, little ones, I know we haven't met properly yet, but I need you to be strong for your mama right now. Stay where you are, just a little longer." One of the babies, Leo, Claire thought, kicked in response. At New York Presbyterian, Dr. Wilson was already waiting with a team of specialists. They whisked Claire into the high-risk maternity ward, while Lucas was temporarily held back to complete paperwork. He found himself in the waiting room with Victoria, Regina, and Lila, all still in their clothes from the confrontation at Hayes Tower. "Indeed, the FBI has all the board members in custody," Victoria reported quietly, Bradford singing like a canary, implicating Charles in everything from Robert's murder to decades of financial crimes. "None of that matters if—" Lucas couldn't finish the sentence, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Claire's strong," Lila said firmly, "and those babies are fighters, like their parents." Regina, who had been unusually quiet, stepped forward. "Sir Lucas, there's something you should know about the night my father died." She pulled out her phone, showing him a text message. "He sent this to me just before it happened. I didn't understand it then." Lucas read the message. "Tell Hayes' son I was wrong. The therapy works. The trials weren't all fake." "What trials?" Lila asked. "Winters Pharmaceuticals was developing a treatment for preterm labor," Regina explained. "The scandal wasn't about fake medicine. It was about rushing the trials, skipping safety protocols. But the drug itself," she looked at Lucas meaningfully, "it works, and we have the only remaining doses." Lucas's head snapped up. "How experimental is it?" "Very. That's why my father was killed. He wanted to go public with the successful results, but Charles thought the rushed protocols would bring too much scrutiny to both companies." Before Lucas could respond, Dr. Wilson emerged from the treatment area. Her expression was grave. "The medications aren't working as well as we'd hoped. We need to try something more aggressive to stop the labor." "What about the Winters drug?" Lucas asked immediately. Dr. Wilson's eyes widened slightly. "The WP-740 protocol? That's still in trials. The FDA hasn't—" "But it works," Regina interrupted. "I have documentation proving its efficacy, and we have access to the properly manufactured doses." The doctor hesitated. "It's highly experimental. The liability—" "I'll sign whatever you need," Lucas said. "Please, they're too young to survive birth." Dr. Wilson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll need to discuss it with Claire. She has to understand the risks." Inside the treatment room, Claire lay surrounded by beeping monitors, her face pale but determined. When Dr. Wilson explained the experimental treatment, she didn't hesitate. "Do it," she said, looking at Lucas. "Regina's father died trying to save this research. Use it to save our children." The next hours were a blur of activity as the drug was administered. Claire's contractions gradually began to space out, then weaken. By dawn, they had stopped completely. The baby's heartbeats remained strong and steady on the monitor. "It worked," Dr. Wilson announced, checking the latest readings. "But you'll need to stay on bed rest for the duration of the pregnancy. No exceptions." Claire nodded, exhausted but relieved. Lucas sat beside her bed, still holding her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "There's something else," Victoria said from the doorway. She held up her tablet, showing a breaking news headline. "Hayes International Board arrested. Whistleblower Son Saves Company." Below was a photo taken just before everything had gone wrong. Lucas and Claire entering Hayes Tower together, his hand protectively supporting her back, both of them looking determined and united. "The press is calling it the corporate takedown of the decade," Lila added. "Every major network wants an exclusive." "They can wait," Lucas said firmly, his eyes on Claire. "Family comes first." Claire smiled softly, remembering their first meeting in Boston, how lost and alone they'd both been. Now, surrounded by allies who had become family, with their babies safe and growing, she felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. "We should probably talk about names," she murmured sleepily. "Oh, and I've been calling them Faith, Hope, Grace, and Leo in my head." Lucas's eyes filled with tears as he leaned down to kiss her forehead. "They're perfect, like their mother." Outside the hospital windows, the storm was finally clearing. The first rays of dawn painted the snow-covered city in shades of gold and promise. In a cell somewhere, Charles Hayes awaited trial for his crimes. In offices across the city, Federal agents combed through decades of Hayes International records, and in a quiet hospital room, two people who had found each other on a lonely night in Boston held hands and listened to the strong heartbeats of their four tiny miracles. The empire built on lies had crumbled, but something stronger had risen from its ashes, a family built on truth, courage, and love. At 32 weeks pregnant, Claire waddled carefully through the sunlit halls of her new home, a sprawling brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that Lucas had purchased for its proximity to the best neonatal facilities in New York. The winter snow had given way to early spring, cherry blossoms dotting the trees outside her window. After 8 weeks of strict bed rest in the hospital, she'd finally been cleared to come home, though she was still restricted to light activity. The babies, defying all odds, were thriving. Their latest ultrasound photos covered the refrigerator, 4 distinct profiles that already showed hints of personality. "Leo's boxing with hope again," she called out to Lucas, who was working in his home office. Since resigning as CEO of Hayes International to focus on restructuring the company from the outside, he'd thrown himself into transforming the corporation's culture. He appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. The past months had softened something in him, replaced his guarded expression with quiet contentment. "Those two are going to be trouble," he smiled, placing his hand on Claire's enormous belly, just like their mother. "I seem to remember you were the one who started trouble that night in Boston," Claire teased, then sobered slightly. "Have you heard from Ryan?" Lucas nodded. "He's doing well at the rehabilitation center. The therapy's helping him work through the trauma of the attack. He wants to meet you when you're feeling up to it." The doorbell rang before Claire could respond. It was Regina, carrying a stack of files and looking more relaxed than they'd ever seen her. After her father's research had saved the babies, she'd thrown herself into legitimately completing the clinical trials of WP740, now known as the Winters Protocol for preventing preterm labor. "The FDA fast-tracked approval," she announced without preamble. "The protocol's already saved 3 other sets of multiples. We're establishing a foundation to make it accessible to high-risk pregnancies worldwide." "That's wonderful," Claire said warmly, lowering herself carefully onto the sofa. "Your father would be proud." Regina's eyes softened. "I think he would. The investigation cleared his name, proved he was trying to do the right thing in the end." She hesitated. "There's something else. They're announcing the sentences tomorrow for the board members who took plea deals." Lucas tensed slightly. The criminal proceedings against Hayes International's former leadership had dominated financial news for months. And Charles, still refusing to plead. "His trial starts next month." Regina set down her files. "He's requested to see you." Claire grabbed Lucas's hand as she felt him stiffen. "No," she said firmly. "He lost that right when he tried to take our children." "I know," Lucas said quietly, "but part of me wants to face him one last time, to show him that his legacy of fear ends with him." The babies chose that moment to stage what felt like a gymnastics routine. Claire winced, then laughed. "I think they're voting no on seeing Grandpa Charles." Victoria arrived then, letting herself in with her key. Since the crisis, she'd transitioned from Lucas's employee to family, serving as godmother-to-be for Faith. Lila would be Hope's godmother, Regina for Grace, and Ryan for Leo. "The nursery furniture finally arrived," she announced. "The installation team is coming tomorrow, and Lila's on her way with lunch. She's got news about the class action suit from the pension holders." Claire watched as her unlikely family settled into their usual spots in the living room. Victoria pulled out her tablet to show them the latest nursery designs. Regina spread out her foundation proposals on the coffee table. Through the window, she could see Rachel doing her usual security sweep of the perimeter. Some habits died hard. "I've been thinking," she said during a lull in the conversation, "about what to do with my PR experience. What if we established a division within the restructured Hayes International focused on corporate accountability? Help other whistleblowers expose corruption safely." Lucas looked at her with pride. "You want to go back to work? Are you sure?" "Not right away," Claire smiled, rubbing her belly. These four will keep us busy for a while. But eventually, I want our children to grow up seeing that you can fight for what's right and win. That fear and secrets don't have to rule your life. Speaking of the babies, Victoria interjected, have you decided on middle names yet? Claire and Lucas exchanged a look. They'd had many late-night discussions about this, wanting the names to reflect the strength and hope that had brought them all through the darkness. Faith Victoria Hayes, Lucas began. Hope Elizabeth Hayes, Claire continued, using Lila's middle name. Urdes Grace Regina Hayes and Leonard Ryan Hayes. Regina blinked back unexpected tears. You're really using our names. You're all part of their story, Claire said simply. Part of our family now. Lila arrived then, bursting through the door with bags of food and a triumphant expression. The pension holders won. Full restitution, plus damages. The judge cited Lucas's testimony as the deciding factor. As they celebrated over lunch, Claire looked around at these people who had become so precious to her. Victoria efficiently organizing everyone's schedules, Regina and Lila arguing playfully over baby shower plans, Lucas watching them all with quiet joy while keeping one protective hand on her belly. Later, as the sun set over Brooklyn, Claire stood in the nearly finished nursery. The four cribs formed a semicircle under a hand-painted mural of a night sky. Stars twinkled softly, a gift from Regina, who had remembered Claire mentioning the constellations visible that night in Boston. Lucas found her there, wrapping his arms carefully around her from behind, having second thoughts about the corporate accountability division. No, Claire leaned back against him. I want to help other people find their voice, their courage, like we did. You were always courageous, Lucas murmured into her hair. You walked into that bar in Boston, taking a chance on living again. You faced down my father's empire without flinching. You fought to keep our babies safe against impossible odds. We fought together, Claire corrected, then gasped slightly as all four babies seemed to move in agreement. Lucas chuckled, his hands spanning her belly. I think they're saying Mama's right, as usual. Outside their window, the cherry blossoms danced in the spring breeze. Somewhere in the city, federal prosecutors prepared their case against Charles Hayes, but here in this room, with new life stirring beneath their joined hands, the future felt full of possibility. They had faced the storm together and emerged stronger. Now it was time to build something new, not an empire of fear, but a legacy of love, truth, and second chances. At 36 weeks pregnant, Claire Bennett Hayes lay in New York Presbyterian's delivery room, surrounded by a medical team led by Dr. Wilson. The scheduled C-section had been carefully planned for optimal timing, but the babies, true to form, had their own schedule. Her water had broken naturally in the early hours of the morning, setting everything in motion. You're doing great, Lucas murmured, holding her hand as the anesthesiologist administered the epidural. They're right on time. Claire smiled through her nervousness. Of course they are. They're Hayes babies. They like to make an entrance. The operating room was filled with specialists. One team for each baby. Dr. Wilson had coordinated everything meticulously, determined to give the quadruplets the best possible start. Outside in the waiting room, their extended family gathered. Victoria reviewing contingency plans one last time, Regina pacing nervously, Lila trying to distract everyone with coffee and stories, and Ryan, recently released from rehabilitation, sitting quietly with a small stuffed animal for each baby. All right, Claire, Dr. Wilson said warmly. Are you ready to meet your little ones? Claire squeezed Lucas's hand. We've been ready since Boston. The next few minutes were a blur of focused activity. Then, at 9:47 a.m., a strong cry filled the room as Faith Victoria Hayes made her entrance into the world. Her sisters followed in quick succession, Hope at 9:49, Grace at 9:51, each with increasingly vigorous protests about leaving their cozy home. Finally, at 9:54 a.m., Leonard Ryan Hayes completed the family with what could only be described as an indignant wail. They're perfect, Lucas whispered, tears streaming down his face as the babies were quickly examined and wrapped, all of them. The medical team worked efficiently, making sure each baby was stable. Despite being technically premature, the quadruplets were remarkably healthy, a testament to the winter's protocol and months of careful monitoring. Faith weighed 5 pounds 2 ounces, Hope 5 pounds even, Grace 4 pounds 15 ounces, and Leo, the smallest but loudest, 4 pounds 13 ounces. As Claire was moved to recovery, Lucas went to update their waiting family. The joy and tears in the waiting room could be heard all the way down the hall. Hours later, in a private suite arranged by Victoria, Claire sat propped up in bed, holding Faith while Lucas cradled Leo. Lila and Regina each held one of the other girls, their faces soft with wonder. "They're so different already," Lila marveled. "Hope keeps trying to grab my finger." "Grace is just taking everything in," Regina added, watching the baby's alert eyes scan the room. "She's going to be the observant one. And Leo hasn't stopped complaining since he arrived." Lucas chuckled as his son squirmed and fussed. "He gets that from my side of the family." "Speaking of family," Victoria said from her post by the door, "Charles's verdict came in an hour ago." The room fell silent. They'd deliberately scheduled the C-section for the same day as the verdict, wanting the baby's arrival to overshadow whatever outcome emerged from the courthouse. "Guilty on all counts," Victoria continued softly. 25 years without possibility of parole. "It's over." Claire looked down at Faith, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "No," she said, "it's just beginning." Ryan, who had been quietly watching his new nieces and nephew, spoke up. "I visited him before the verdict. He asked about the baby." He met Lucas's eyes. "I told him they would never know fear or manipulation, that they would grow up surrounded by love and truth. And family," Claire added, smiling at the people around her. "The kind you choose." A knock at the door revealed Dr. Wilson with Regina's research team. The baby's remarkably healthy arrival would be documented as part of the ongoing Winter's Protocol study, helping future families facing similar challenges. "The press is getting restless," Victoria reported, checking her phone. "They want the first photos of the Hayes quadruplets." "Let them wait," Lucas said firmly. This moment belonged to family. As if on cue, all 4 babies began to stir, their different personalities already evident in their cries. Grace's soft whimper, Hope's demanding wail, Faith's musical complaints, and Leo's continued commentary on the injustice of it all. "I think they're hungry," Claire laughed. "Everyone out except Daddy." As their family filed out, promising to return later, Claire looked at Lucas. He was watching Leo with an expression of pure wonder, all traces of his past darkness gone from his face. "Thank you," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For walking into that bar in Boston, for being brave enough to love again, for giving me these perfect miracles." Lucas carefully laid Leo in his bassinet, then took Faith from Claire's arms to join her sister. One by one, he gathered their children, placing them safely in their bassinets before returning to Claire's side. "You're the miracle," he said, kissing her forehead. "You showed me that running away isn't the same as being free. That real strength comes from facing your fears and choosing love anyway." Through the window, they could see cherry blossoms dancing in the spring breeze. The same trees that had welcomed them home were now welcoming their children into the world. "I was so lost that night in Boston," Claire mused, "looking for anything to numb the pain. And I was hiding from everything I feared I'd become," Lucas added. "Then you walked in, and suddenly everything changed." They finished together. The babies stirred again, their cries harmonizing in a chorus that would become the soundtrack of their new life. Claire and Lucas moved together to tend to them, their actions already falling into an instinctive dance of parenthood. In the years to come, there would be challenges and triumphs, laughter and tears. Hayes International would be rebuilt into a force for corporate accountability, with Claire's whistleblower protection program at its heart. The Winter's Protocol would save countless families, becoming Regina's father's true legacy. Victoria, Lila, and Ryan would be constant presences, the aunts and uncle who spoiled the quadruplets shamelessly. But in this moment, as spring sunlight filled the hospital room and 4 tiny lives demanded attention, none of that mattered. What mattered was the love that had brought them here, a love strong enough to break generational chains, expose long-buried truths, and create something beautiful from the ashes of the past. Faith, Hope, Grace, and Leo would grow up knowing their origin story, not just the dramatic parts about corporate intrigue and family redemption, but the simple truth at its heart. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single step into the unknown, and the bravest thing you can do is open your heart to love. In Boston, the Crimson Room still stood, its warm lights still promising refuge to lost souls. But Claire and Lucas had found their way home, to each other, to their chosen family, and to the 4 perfect reasons they had to be brave. Their story had come full circle, and their new chapter was just beginning. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.